Nikola Jokic is the most well-rounded offensive center in the game and one of the most well-rounded offensive centers of all time. And before you get on my case for claiming recency bias, which center in NBA history was one of the best 5 passers in the league, could knock down over 5 threes on any given night, and could hit any one of many post moves at will? There's a big distinction between best overall center and best offensive center of all time, and despite him not being either, you can't argue not many, if any, centers in history have had as many different ways to impact their team's offense as Jokic does. Again, let me just clarify, this doesn't mean he's better than Shaq, but it also means he can do more than Shaq could do. On a broad spectrum, obviously Shaq could score better, Shaq's one of the greatest players of all time, but just you get what I'm saying. But the history of the center position aside, Jokic has continued to dominate on the offensive end of the floor throughout this year's playoffs. His defensive issues are a different story, and we'll get into that, but offensively you would be hard-pressed to find many more impactful players than the Joker. This is now the second year of seeing Jokic in the playoffs, and the second year in a row, he's proven that he can elevate his ability to perform when it matters most, including performing against a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year in Rudy Gobert, and now continuing to dominate in the playoffs against a lesser established center rotation of the Clippers, but still a decent one at that. And obviously the Clippers defense has a number of other players that can come in and help, like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and they're one of the best defenses in the league, and he's still dominating them. And that's where I think Jokic separates himself from other stars in the league. Some of the best players in the league step up in the playoffs. Kawhi and LeBron obviously come to mind, and others' efficiency and impact diminishes. Harden and Damian Lillard, for example. This doesn't mean Harden and Lillard are bad playoff performers like some people make it out to be. It's just they underperform relative to their regular season impact. Their numbers go down, and so does their efficiency. It hasn't really happened for Harden this year, but in general that has happened over the course of his career. Quickly before I get into the video, if you could drop a like right now, that would be greatly appreciated. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it does help out the channel and the video significantly. So drop a like for the Joker, drop a like for the channel, drop a like to keep the videos rolling. Thank you very much. Let's get back into it. And just to emphasize his efficiency and dominance in the playoffs, of the top 20 scorers in the playoffs last year, this was his first year in the playoffs, one player shot a better percentage from the field than Jokic. That was Kevin Durant, potentially the greatest offensive player of all time. And no, I'm not counting him as the best offensive player in the NBA currently, because he's currently not playing, so don't say that in the comments as an argument. But it gets better for Jokic because not only was he efficient at scoring, but he was an efficient playmaker. His 8.5 assists per game only resulted in 2.5 turnovers, which is just unheard of. That's incredibly good. To be creating that many points for yourself and your teammates, and to only average 2.5 turnovers per game, is pretty incredible. Just for context, every player that scored 25 points or more averaged at least 3 turnovers per game during the playoffs, and these were the players that averaged more assists than Jokic or slightly less, and they all turned the ball over more than him as well. Now, I don't know if committing turnovers would be considered more of a defensive or offensive play, because it's giving the ball back to the opposition, but regardless, it's crucial, and Jokic did it less than any other star in the league last year. And before we transition into how Jokic has been performing this year and in this year's playoffs, he was also responsible for the 3rd most screen assist points in last year's playoffs, and it might seem like I'm just throwing out numbers, but everyone talks about the gravity elite guards create, but Jokic is able to create those same opportunities for his guards because of his presence as a 3-point shooter and his big frame as a screener, allowing good looks for the likes of Murray and Monte Morris. But enough about how good he was in last year's playoffs, let's talk about what Jokic has done this season and the case he is making for being the most impactful offensive player in the NBA. The Nuggets have solid pieces around him, but that's all they are. Murray showed his worth in the first round, but the issue I've always had with him is his inability to get to the line. He doesn't have that reliable way of scoring when he isn't shooting well, and that's why he'll drop 30 or 40, then 10 or 12 or 15 points the next game. And if he can turn those 12-point games into 20-point games, he can be an all-star level player, but he's still a developing player, and this was the best version of Murray we've ever seen in the first round of the playoffs. We didn't get that in the regular season to this extent, and Michael Porter Jr. wasn't performing like this during the regular season either. and yet Jokic still managed to will his team to the third place in the West, only behind the Clippers and Lakers, two teams that appear to have far more talent, but the sheer weight of Jokic's offensive impact was great enough to win the Nuggets so many games, just like it was last year. Now, the Nuggets don't have a bad roster by any means, they have quite a deep one, and a good regular season one, but they still don't have the same kind of talent or the same kind of second option that all the teams in the top of the Western Conference have compared to Denver. And it's not just about how many points or assists he gets, he's an orchestrator on offense. During the Clippers game, there was a prime example of this late in the first quarter. He was signaling to Monte Morris to move from outside the three-point line to just inside on the baseline, and was persistent in this, with Morris being a bit slow to react, but after eventually moving to where Jokic saw was the ideal spot, a few seconds later Jokic gets the ball and finds Morris cutting to the rim with a no-look pass, deceiving the defenders with his eyes and putting it on a plate. That shows up as an assist, but the stats don't show the IQ of the Joker on offense, and he is consistently organizing the offense and creating open looks, whether it be a direct assist or a hockey pass or just putting someone in place. He has a say in pretty much all of the Nuggets offense when he's on the floor. And for the second year in a row, Jokic has now elevated his regular season performance in the playoffs. And more impressive than anything, it's not just a result of increased shot attempts, increased minutes, and an increased incentive to win, resulting in better overall stats. His efficiency has actually gone up, and personally, I very rarely watch Jokic line up a three and not expect it to go in. He has been absolutely automatic from beyond the arc this playoffs. He's shooting over 50% from the field and just under 50 from three, and over 80 from the line, and he did this against Rudy Gobert and now a Clippers team that was one of the best defenses in the league, regardless of how you think of their center rotation. But just to emphasize how impossible he is to guard, the Clippers had to rotate through Zubac, Harrell, and Green in the first 8 minutes of Game 3. 8 minutes into Game 3, Zubac had fouled Jokic twice, Harrell had done so twice, and Green sent him to the line with his first foul. And that's just because you can't stop him. They have no answers for him. They can talk all the trash they want, but the reality is he's giving them all buckets. It's kind of up to the rest of the team to make shots and come along with him, which doesn't look like happening. The Clippers are ultimately probably too talented for them. Personally, what I think separates Jokic from some of the guards like Lillard and Harden in the playoffs is when the defenses start keying in on those guys and sending double teams, which happens to pretty much any top 10, 15 player, any person that's the number one option on an offense. It's hard for them to see over the top or establish position inside the arc to kick out because of their lack of size. Jokic, on the other hand, is 7 foot and's great at posting up. So when he has established position and you go to double team, he can see over that defender and make the pass out of the double team better than probably any player in the NBA. And this is why teams are reluctant to do so, because how do you double team a 7-foot center that is also one of the best 3 or 4 passers in the league? You just don't, or you don't do so successfully at least. And if you want a few more stats to back up how good Jokic has been, offensive win shares are supposed to be a stat that measures how much a player contributes to a team's wins throughout the season, and Jokic was 3rd in the league, but at the same time, take it with a grain of salt, because despite the top 10 looking pretty accurate to what you'd expect, you have the likes of Hassan Whiteside in the top 20, so I would not base an argument on this stat, but it's just something else to note, and a tangible stat to support Jokic's offense contributing to winning basketball. Do I think Nikola Jokic is the best offensive player in the NBA? I would probably give that to a LeBron James or perhaps a Luka Doncic, maybe even James Harden because of how well he has performed in this year's playoffs. But based off his ability to impact his team's success during the regular season, and then way more importantly, his ability to dominate postseason games, Jokic is probably one of the 3 or 4 best offensive players in the league, and I would be open to hearing a case about him being the best, because I think he's right up there. I just think we need to see a little bit more assertion from him at times. I know he asserts himself a lot more in the playoffs, but for someone who's one of the best passers in the league, and also a reliable 3-point shooter, obviously not the regular season aside, but he has been most of his career, and someone who has some of the best touch around the rim and in the mid-range area of anyone in the league, not to mention he can put the ball on the floor and finish with his offhand going to the rim. He can do anything to score pretty much. He's even been dunking now, so make of that what you will. There are very few players that can be the identity of a team's offense, and Jokic is one of those guys, and that's what makes him the best center in the league. and a one-of-a-kind center, someone we might not see for quite a long time. If there was one aspect of Jokic's game that I would like to see him improved, defense aside, it would be his ability to get to the line. Pretty much all of the NBA's star players average close to 9 attempts per game. Joel Embiid got to the line on average 15 times a game against Boston and averaged 30 points as a result. If Jokic had have averaged 15 free throw attempts a game, he would be averaging around 35. Now this is far-fetched because no one is going to get to the line 15 times a game over the course of a season or a long playoff run, but if he can at least double his attempts, it will help all aspects of his game and will elevate his scoring even more, which I don't think should determine how good he is as a player, and it doesn't, but getting to the line is a part of being a star player and a superstar player, and so that's what Jokic has to do. And I know he thinks that he doesn't get the calls from the referees all the time, and I don't think he does. I think he gets fouled a lot more than he gets credit for. Looking at you, Patrick Beverley, but in general, he still has to do a better job of drawing contact and drawing the fouls, which will send him to the line and help him from having to score the hard way, which he seems to always do. I mean, he's one of the best in the league at doing so, but some easy points would be nice to see. As always, if you did enjoy the video, a like and sub would be greatly appreciated. Do you think the Joker is the best offensive player in the league? If not, who do you think it is? Let me know in the comments. Other than that, I'll catch you next time. Bye.